two dialogue partners. Tonight they will also speak to each other in English. I present them very briefly in alphabetical order. I am very happy to say hello to Adam Broomberg. He's an artist who lives and works in London, but he also teaches as a professor in Hamburg at the Hochschule für Bildende Künste. Just two very brief mentions. Together with Oliver Chanarin, he was awarded in 2013 the Deutsche Börse Photography Prize for their book Warprimer 2, a book about which we will talk tonight, I guess. A book that deals with Bertolt Brechts' publication of the Warprimer in 1955. And in 2015, he was awarded again, together with Oliver Chanarin, the International Center of Photography Infinity Award for their publication Holy Bible. And his dialogue partner tonight is Grischka Petri. He's associate professor at the University of Bonn. And he has the interesting combination of being an art historian and a lawyer. So what he's also very interested in is the art history of copyright. And that was also the initial idea which we had when we were teaming up Adam Broomberg and Grischka Petri, that we thought, okay, the Warprimer 2 draws upon Bertolt Brechts' Warprimer, so maybe we can talk about copyright issues here. And when Grischka Petri was invited and had a look at the Warprimer 2, he immediately said, that's not the right topic. We should talk about another kind of legal questions which are opening up here. It's more about the question of justice, of human rights, because the photographies of Adam Broomberg deal also very heavily with violence, with violation of laws and justice. And we were very grateful for Grischka Petri for suggesting this topic, which of course turns out to be much more fruitful than the original one we had in mind. And with that, I hand over to you, I guess, Adam, that at the beginning you will show us some specimens of your work so that the audience knows what we're talking about in the next minutes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Lani. Thank you, Grischka. And also thank you, David Company, who curated the Biennale and who has been a constant source of inspiration and support, I think, throughout mine and Ollie's and my career. So I just wanted to say that. The work I'm going to show you has been spoken about a lot. It's all over, you can find it on the internet. So I'm just going to show it as a means to kind of locate the discussion or orientate the discussion, as opposed to giving a thorough kind of explanation or insight into the project. But I will start by sharing my screen. And open where? Preview. So let's start at the beginning. Henry mentioned the Warprimer, Bertolt Brechts Kriegsfibel, the Warprimer. Very quickly, I mean, to summarize it, while Brecht was in exile during the war and kind of alienated from his audience, and he did a lot of work into his diary, and whether it's his work or Ruth Bernau's work is always disputed, and it's probably more her work as usual. But what he did is every day he would take a cutting from a newspaper, and he described the photographs that he was seeing in the newspaper as hieroglyphics that were in need of some kind of decoding or interpretation. And he used the 4-line poem format to do that kind of either a kind of decoding or translation, or I guess a complication, because some of them are not a simple translation. Some of them complicate the image that we're looking at. And this was published in East Germany in 1955. It was then translated into English, I think in the 80s at some point. I came across it in a secondhand store, and Ollie and I bought up the last remaining copies of this English translation. And we spoke to the publisher, who was quite excited about our idea. And our idea was to take the original Kriegsfibel and as an object. Whoops, what happened there? Sorry, this is classic stuff, isn't it? Give me a second. So where I was our idea was to take Brechts' original Kriegsfibel, and we went to visit the Akademie der Kunst, where Brechts' archive is kept, and spoke to the archivist, who became the most lovely kind of comrade in this project, I guess. And what we did is we took the original book, and as you can see, we literally silk screened on top of it a layer, which kind of made us the co-authors. But we also kind of hijacked it. So where Libris was the publisher, Mac being our publisher, we silk screened over that. And it's a classic kind of act of like détournement, I guess, the Situationist International act of like hijacking something, repurposing it for something more contemporary. And what we did is instead of Brecht, who was cutting out images from newspapers, we looked at both the surface and the dark web for images. And our parameters were the so-called War on Terror, which started with 9/11, as you see. And if I can just read that poem out, the original image underneath it, Brecht had chosen, was an image taken of the bombing of Liverpool from the air. And this was a unique perspective for Brecht and for all of us. We had never seen images at that point from the top down, looking down at Earth. But the poem says, a cloud of smoke told us that they were here. They were sons of fire, not of the light. They came from where? They came out of darkness. Where did they go? Into eternal night. Similarly, this is an image from the invasion of Gaza that happened at the time. That was taken off 2 websites. And at the back of our book, it's important to mention that we quote the websites that these images were taken from. And where, even if they disputed, at one point this was an image used by both pro and anti-Zionist states kind of websites. That, of course, is the WikiLeaks image that we all know. Again, just to read the poem quickly, there was a time of underneath and over when mankind was the master of the air. And so, while some were flying high, the rest took cover, which didn't stop them dying down below. And the image underneath our superimposed image is people seeking shelter in the London Underground during the bombing. There is Abu Ghraib, obviously. And here is a mix of kind of fact and fictional images of martyrs in the Palestinian struggle for independence. And I won't name which is which, but some are from film and some are original martyr images. And this is an image from a website, I think, called www.whatnottodressuponhalloween.com. So I guess what's important to realize about this time is, the parameters were, as I said, at beginning 9/11 and ending with the assassination of bin Laden. And to look at the role of images during this period, which is often described as a war of images that began with what the famous, amazing group Retort, and particularly Ian Boal, described as an image wound sustained by America. 9/11 as an image wound, and the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq as a pursuit for images to reply to that image wound. That is Donald Rumsfeld. That comes from a website called www.unicycle.com. That's from Haiti. And I'm just going to move through these. This is the beginning of the refugee crisis. And of course, ending with the highly orchestrated and choreographed image of Obama and his regime ordering the assassination of bin Laden. And then the last page is actually left empty because, interestingly, the operatives who went and killed bin Laden were ordered not to take a photograph because what they wanted least of all was to create a kind of image of martyrdom in a way. And they verified bin Laden's, they verified that it was bin Laden because they knew exactly how tall he was. And there was a operative SEAL, Navy SEAL, who lay next to him, who was 6'2", and they took a measurement and they used that. And we know that there was a picture taken of that, the Navy SEAL lying next to the body of bin Laden. It hasn't been leaked yet, but we left this open space for in the future because images are so slippery. I'm sure it will appear. The next project, I'm just going to zoom through this, is something that was shown at the Triennale, which started with this remarkable image which was taken in 1979 of an assassination just after the revolution. So Khomeini had just taken control. This was up north. It was an assassination of Kurds by Khomeini's soldiers. It was taken by a very young photojournalist called Razmi, who worked for Etelat, the main newspaper. It was published on the front page the day after this incident, and it subsequently won that year the Pulitzer Prize for photography. But if you look in the Pulitzer Prize book on photography, it's the only picture that doesn't have an author. It's anonymous. And we happened to meet a Washington Post journalist who had noticed that and had invested years and years in finding who the original photographer was. And he passed on that information to us, and we went to Iran and we went to Razmi's studio. He was then in his 60s and was a wedding photographer on the outskirts of Tehran. And he literally pulled out of a gap in the wall the rest of the contact strip, sheets. So he had shot a whole roll of film of 36 pictures. He had walked around this event, but this was the one picture that was published in the paper, and it became iconic. And I think the reason why David Campany chose this project was the idea behind his kind of group show was unpicking this kind of iconic or iconographic moment or image and what informs that image. And what we did is we printed out, with Razmi's permission, all of the photographs he took. And we cut out all of the protagonists, literally with a scalpel, from the series of pictures. So this is one person, and if you look, there he is on the right of the image, right? And that's what the Pulitzer Prize saw, that's what the public saw on the front page of the Washington Post. But we took that person and we placed him in positions which indicated where Razmi, the photographer, was in perspective to him during that moment, right? And that's what interested us, is how complex a moment is, as opposed to how kind of shallow and narrow and reductionist a photograph, particularly an award-winning or published photograph, reduces a historical moment to. And I always say this, and I said this to you the other day, all of you, I always quote Pierre Huyghe, who was asked in an interview, what would his perfect film be? And he said it would be the assassination of JFK, but from multiple angles, because it was only filmed from one angle, and our collective memory of that traumatic moment is that one perspective. And I think what this project kind of attempts is to blow apart that that notion that history can be summarized in one image, because the problem with that is will come out in our discussion, but that was the attempt. And this is how we showed it. It's sealed between glass and, you know, there's a shadow cast. I'll quickly go through two other projects if I'm not taking too much time, just to talk about the kind of juridical nature of our work in a way, or journalistic. Somehow we were alerted to the fact that Polaroid had a particular relationship with the apartheid regime in South Africa, where Ollie and I both grew up. Ollie until he was 6 or 7, I grew up till I was 20. And a woman called Caroline Hunter, who was an accountant for Polaroid, noticed that 10% of their 100 million in the year 76, I think it was, came from South Africa. So literally, you know, which totally baffled her. And she investigated, and her partner worked as a chemist in the Polaroid company. And what they discovered was there was an odd, very strange collusion between the apartheid regime and Polaroid, the company, because the apartheid regime, as is well known now, made it law that every non-white person in South Africa had to carry a passbook with them. And in that passbook was a picture, both a front-on and a side-on picture, and the reason why that person was or was allowed to be in the particular place they were. And in order to do that, Polaroid invented a camera that if you put one film in it, you would shoot one picture, and you can see on the left, one of the shutters would open, and then you'd ask the subject to turn to the right, and it would take a side-on view. But not only that, the real crux of the issue is it had a button at the back called the boost button, which emitted much more light than a normal Polaroid, which would allow a darker skin to be legible on Polaroid, which was not legible at the time. So we purchased some of these cameras off eBay, kind of refurbished them, and went to South Africa. And it really wasn't important what we photographed, because we landed up photographing like fauna, you know, but or flora, I mean, but anything that came out of that machine was political, you know, so it really didn't matter. And lastly, just to talk about a project about the history of Kodak film and race and racism, is this literally happened as follows. We were printing with our printer in London, and as the roll of print, which is now digital, but although it's a kind of chemical process, came out, there was a picture of like a load of colors and gray to black gradation, and a picture of a woman and a llama next to a picture of a llama. And I was like, what are those pictures? And he was like, that's Shirley. And I said, what do you mean that's Shirley? And he said, don't you know Shirley? And I said, no. And it turns out that when color film was invented, the spectrum of how you could print in a color lab was so broad, they would send a 35mm transparency of a person who happened to work for Kodak, who was named Shirley. So this is Shirley from the 1950s. And it would go to every lab in order to calibrate the printing to a normal standard. It was called normal, right? But it was Caucasian skin. And so the normal standard for film at that point was predicated to Caucasian skin. And this is Shirley from the 60s, and that's Shirley from the 80s, right? And we've got Shirley in the 2020s now. And we investigated this thing, and what's really interesting is that when Mozambique gained independence, Samora Machel took power, and he invited 3 very radical filmmakers, because there was no such thing as a television station in Mozambique. This was late 70s, and he invited Ray Guerra, Jean Rouge, and Jean-Luc Godard to come. And the brief he gave them was to say, look, we don't have a television station. Why should we base it on a kind of imperialist Western idea of what television is? Let's reformat the entire thing. And the one thing this is Cahiers du Cinéma, the 300th edition, which is dedicated to this project. The one thing that Godard said is, I refuse to use Kodak film because it's racist, which is a strange statement. And then we researched the history and we understood that until Kodak's two biggest clients, who were the furniture industry and the confectionery industry, like basically chocolate, complained they couldn't photograph dark and light wood, so teak and yellow wood, or vanilla and dark chocolate together, because the color film couldn't cope with that expanse of color range. That's the moment when Kodak responded to this thing. And if you look at early photographs of kind of beginning of the civil rights movement, images of schools, when there's a few black children in the school pictures, literally just the whites of their eyes and their teeth are visible, right? And what we did is we were then, just to sum up, we were invited on one of these noxious projects, which is come to Gabon and for 2 weeks and document our country, you know, which is thankfully probably ending, but these commissions like invite 2 white men to document a country. And what we did is we bought, again on eBay, all the Kodak film that predicated, like was so-called racist in Godard's terms, right? So it couldn't cope with the expanse. And that's the only film we took. And we literally journeyed in a converted German World War II ambulance into the rainforest for days and days, and came across a kind of a ritual, a Bwiti ritual, and it wasn't happening for us, it was genuine, and they allowed us to photograph it, and we did. But this is the only shot that came out because the film was so outdated. And it was such a relief to us in a way. But it's pink because it lacks the, I don't know, the opposite, whatever that is, the green, you know. But I guess I just want to leave it there and say that, you know, we can tease out the kind of legal or conceptual things together. But I think it's enough of me talking.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. That's, I think, a very good introduction into the world of images you're doing, because you just highlighted the juridical, journalistic also effects of these photographies. And I was thinking about another talk we had earlier with Tim Rautert, because he was doing this type of picture analytical photography, where he was trying to show how we look at photographies and what photographies do with the topic which is represented. And you have shown us also a wider frame of political context for photographies. So Grischka, I invite you to share your thoughts on what we just have seen.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of highly complex photographs, I think, but just when you presented the Warprimer again, it happened what always happens when I look at these pictures. These are haunting images. They grip you. They show, in a way, they show the constant failure of human rights and to put a legal end to terror, because you talked about wounds, and you asked the question, how do you reply to a wound? And this is, I think this goes to the center of the political and the human rights question too, because one of the more famous quotes by Bertha von Suttner, the peace activist from roughly 100 years ago, she said, look, people always think that they can wash out blood with more blood. And this is what it reminds me of, because it's a moment, in a way the Warprimer too does what a photograph does. It freezes a moment in this ongoing war. And I wonder, I mean, photographs and these images, they, on the one hand, are part of that war, and on the other hand, the way you interfere with these images, you make clear that, yeah, are you a warrior, a photographer, both?
Do you know what one of my favorite programs, because, you know, in the 70s in South Africa, late 70s in South Africa, we had one channel and it was awful, and it was all mostly German programs dubbed into Afrikaans, believe it or not.
And Bonanza and Barber Papa.
There was a program called Derek.
Oh,
Derek.
Yeah.
And now, did he do post-mortems? Am I right in remembering that?
what do you mean?
He did. Wasn't he? He was a detective, but he also did post-mortems on bodies. Is that not right? No.
No.
Okay, I'm confusing two memories, but my point was, there was another program at the same time about, and I think two things to reply to you, Grischka. I think there's dealing with wounds on a state level, and I think what we were trying to allude to was 9/11 was perceived as a wound done unto the state, and the state then sought to create a reply, you know, wounds in reply to that. I think what we were doing was more of a post-mortem, which was saying, look at how images functioned in this dynamic, and let's try and be aware of that, and no more or less than that. But I understand where you're coming from, and I think the post-mortem analogy or metaphor is quite good, because I think I don't get disturbed looking at those things. I understand how they function, and you know, when you look at the Abu Ghraib images and you think about Errol Morris, who collaborated with Philip Gorovitch. Philip Gorovitch published a book. Errol Morris made a documentary about Abu Ghraib. And famously, Gorovitch refused to republish any of the pictures because he said that would be reenacting the purpose of the images, which was to humiliate and dehumanize the subjects. And Philip Gorovitch made a meal of those images. And this is the kind of key for me, which is, how do images function as juridical evidence, as emotional impulse to donate money, to activate somebody politically, to deactivate somebody, to, propel them. But most of all, I think, and this is something we did talk about the other day, is that was a very particular moment where images were so effective. And we spoke about, since the beginning of Corona, we know that there are active wars running in like the tens, the tens and 20s, or active wars around the world. None of us have seen images of any of those wars. Not as evidence, not as reportage, not as human rights appeals, and there's this strange vacuum. And so I think we're in a particular moment again where, yes, Black Lives Matter has been extensively covered and catalyzed and damned and critiqued, and from every angle through images, mostly through social media. But I think we're in a very different moment when it comes to the media. So, and I think that work needs to be contextualized and not looked at from where we are right now or how you feel today. I think it had its purpose and its place.
I agree. You mention, or you describe, you analyze in a kind of double, a paradoxical double bind, if I get this right, because you you show the evidence by manipulating the existent image that, however, is not evidence but propaganda. So you add a layer in that Warprimer, which seemingly is like, well, it could be discussed in terms of appropriation and all that as a cover version, literally really bad pun on a book, but by interfering there is something else happens. It's like what you described with that photograph of the execution in Iran, that you dissect it and point out the elements of how the meaning is generated by that photograph. So yeah, it is a postmortem, but it's counterintuitive because, at least if you're not a professional dissector of photographs in some ways, and maybe this is why I still keep reacting so in that immediate, on that immediate level. It's like when I go to the cinema, I can go there as a professional art historian, but somehow I tend to lose my distance, and then I start crying. And some of that happens and is possibly attached to the medium. So I need to make an extra effort to get through this, or to get into this mode of the analytical gaze, basically, or the analytical
I think you've hit on a kind of the kind of mainline vein of this thing, where, you know, Brecht chose words to, what was his words, to translate or to decode these hieroglyphics. And what you're looking at when I showed that slideshow are images placed over images, you know, images of trauma placed over images of trauma, and taken on face value. That's not, it's not an intelligent response. But I think understood in context, when you look at the whole thing, plus at the back, our poems were the website addresses, because you know, their names were literally contemporary poetry for me. And I guess the difference between the written language and the visual vocabulary is pivotal here. And I think, you know, it's no surprise photography has always been hovered at the bottom rung of every world. Where it comes to juridical evidence, it's always dubious, because it's been manipulated from its inception. It's like conception. In the art world, it's always been at the service of painting or sculpture to document, or performance to document. So it's in art schools, you know, you'll never go to the photography department party. You'll go to the painting or the sculpture party, you know, because it's, but so it's always kind of the reject in terms of its veracity or its value, because it lacks the kind of aura of the artist, you know, and it lacks, and the fact that it's reproducible ad infinitum makes it worthless in an artistic sense. But for me, that makes it the most interesting thing. You know, but not to contradict you, I think it needs language. And photography without the language is so problematic.
It's something that it would share then with all the other artistic genres. I mean, they
not painting.
That's interesting.
Not painting, and
because isn't that a kind of parallel fallacy, that one believes in painting as painting, thinking that, oh yeah, this is something I intuitively understand, but it doesn't, any artifact or artistic object or image need a context.
No, I mean, can I say something? I mean, this, and I don't know, this is purely my opinion and it's kind of pretentious, but the painters that I know who give you that feeling of like, this is something sublime and surpasses all kind of written, juridical, any kind of logic, I think it's a different thing. And I've watched some of my closest friends go through 30 years of struggling with that medium. And it's not a linguistic, it's not irrational, it's not, no, it's not, it's a different thing. And I think photography operates in the world that, the reason why you and I can sit here and have a conversation, we are from absolutely, you know, you were educated in law, you were educated in art history. I didn't have a fucking education, but but my, you know, I ostensibly it's a visual one, you know, my language. But the fact that we can talk about stuff that resonates for both of us is that photography is a very different beast. I think it functions, it crosses over every single everything. I mean, you could talk about photography and tax. You can talk about dermatology in photography. You could talk about copyright. You could talk about anything, you name it. You know, Zoom in photography.
Oh yeah.
Virtual
Background.
life, sex. There's nothing you can't talk about where photography doesn't have a pivotal role. And that for me makes it so like urgent as a medium.
Absolutely. I think it is. But isn't that an urgency that comes from its ubiquity as a medium? Because everything you described is sort of underlines the fact that I mean, even tonight, we see each other through digital images. Is this still photography? Yeah, arguably it is, because almost everything has become a kind of digital data set of images.
Wait, hang on. Now you've exited the atmosphere. So I'm happy to go there, but I think we need to stay like within gravity for a minute and just say, like, it's not just the ubiquity, it's that we need to, what the hell does that mean? For me, what's so curious is equipping myself and learning from others how to decode these images that are everywhere.
Yeah,
everywhere. Like, I'm looking around me now, it's like there's like 10,000 images in my room, you know, and it's like none of them are on the wall. And so that's what makes it such a kind of beautiful medium for me. But sorry.
But yeah, isn't that one of the basic confusions about photography, that it for many, I mean, I almost sound like Donald Trump now. Many people say, like, but many people think so, I think, that it is the opposite of what we are talking about. It is in plain sight what a photograph does. I mean, your work clearly demonstrate that the opposite is the case, and how unimmediate a photograph is, and that it is in need of decoding. I think that's a viewpoint that you and Brecht share, and I do as well. But what I think is intriguing is the strategy that you use to do that, because one could kind of, well, the didactic way would be to be, look, this is a photograph that was taken then and then, but it's only one perspective, and I show you all the 42 other perspectives, and then
like I said,
it is.
sorry to interrupt, Grischka, but that work was made 10 years ago or something, and like I say, I'm glad you mentioned the digital, because most of the people that I teach describe themselves as kind of internet natives, right? And the digital is a space where they work and they create and they interact, and half of my students are now making photographs in programs like Cinema 4D and Unity and Blender, and they're not using cameras.
Mm-hmm.
And this is legitimate. That for me is as legitimate. And I think the debate's moved on, and I think the work I've shown you is it's quite archaic. I mean, if it was anyone between the age of 15 and 30 listening to this, they'd be like, oh my God, this is like literally hieroglyphics.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the kind of darkness of political images in the ongoing wars of the tens. I mean, the years 2010 onward. Is that connected to what you've just commented on with the digital base in software and algorithms and the non-optic in some ways? Because it further complicates that mission of post-mortem.
So
it would become another political and by extension law-related problem that we have
totally
before us.
So without dragging up more images of our work, but we did a project called Spirit is a Bone with somebody called Eyal Weizmann, where it was the first moment a company in Russia began to be able to take 3D facial scans of people walking through the street which is now ubiquitous. I mean, every airport, every street, we know that China literally is covered. It used to be, the only area that was covered was Jerusalem. That's covered. But now China is literally, you don't go anywhere without you being scanned as a 3D face. And we did a project on that, and subsequently we did a project which looks at the notion of how surveillance cameras study the movement of bodies in the public space. And it's called pose prediction. And what they do is, we applied it oddly because we approached to look at a film that was literally just unearthed. It was Dziga Vertov's first film prior to Man with a Movie Camera. And it was literally a 4-year project which was documenting the Russian Revolution. And there was, the first time I saw images of Trotsky speaking and Lenin and walking around, and we were given this film and asked to interpret it. And all we did was feed it through a AI algorithm that is now being used on every street corner to predict what is normal and what is abnormal conduct of a person in public. And some of those things are, for instance, falling down is, would immediately raise an alarm, or standing still, loitering for too long. Or so we're examining how these algorithms are embedded with all sorts of power structure, and whether they be white Western male ones, or whether they be autocratic, ones, that they are certainly like politics embedded in the algorithm. And that's where I'm at the moment, is understanding how, in fact, I'm doing a project with my class at HFVK and the Goethe Institute and the Deutsche Börse Fotografie Foundation to try and envisage a three-dimensional space where the four of us, for instance, could meet, could talk, could look at work, could change work, could exchange ideas that wasn't embedded with everything that is problematic about the virtual right now.
So in a way, photography has become something, a metaphor for more. I mean, there's this aspect of technicality that goes with the history of photography, but listening to you, I get the impression that a photographer has become something of an engineer, reverse engineering justice and truth.
Yeah, but you know, there's two types of engineers, right? There's an engineer who's responds to the command to build a bridge over this river, and they'll build the bridge. There's another kind of engineer who says, is this bridge for delivering bread, or is it to allow the Nazis to cross over? And that's the pivotal question, is what kind of an engineer are you going to be?
Yeah. Are you going to build the bomb, or are you going to?
Yeah, and I think this is where you've hit on this is the key, I think. And the problem is that kind of ethical, philosophical self-awareness, or psychoanalytical even, is not built into any programming or coding universities. And I know this. Like my nephew went through 5 years of like the best university that generates the best, handpicks these kind of engineers, coding engineers, and there wasn't half an hour lecture on ethics in 5 years. And they are producing people who could literally, like, you put your trainers on and you'll go to the moon in 3 years, but why? Will we go to the moon with the same colonial impulse that Columbus had, or will we go to the moon, or, it's, I don't know, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it makes one wonder whether all the technical universities need more artists and photographers to tell them something about, I mean, in a way, we
or
like,
lawyers. Or
lawyers, yeah, but human rights.
Yeah, but good lawyers, not fucking horrible lawyers, right? It's like, you know what I mean?
Speaking of wounds, you putting the finger inside, because, I mean, the law can stand on either side. It can make similar choices, just like the engineer. Like, are you like Rudy Giuliani? I mean, technically he's a lawyer, but morally, he's just a really bad example. And
listen, I'm the son of two lawyers, so I grew up in the heart of darkness.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. Yeah. I mean, it's a complex task, really. That
yeah, but isn't it great? Isn't it lovely? It's like, I've got to say something. Like the amount, I'm a 50-year-old white Jewish South African man. It's like, oh my fucking God, why am I even talking on this forum? Honestly, like, it's embarrassing that I'm being given this airtime, and it's the sooner the oxygen I'm given runs out, the better, in my opinion. But in the meantime, I find this moment, because a lot of my colleagues come to me, and say, I can't get grants, I can't find a publisher, I can't find and I'm like, this is the most exciting time, if we've got the privilege just to have enough money to feed ourselves and those dependent on us, and reformat how we've been programmed. And I find, like, I'm watching the students in the two universities I work empower themselves to the point where I need to watch my language every moment. And I'm not talking about like a noxious cancel culture. I'm talking about be aware, right? And I find it like, if you rise to that challenge, what happened to my father is he calcified at this moment in history. He turned 50 and the so-called youth run amok, and he kind of calcified, you know, like the music was shit, the fashion was alienating, the films were scary, you know what I mean? Or you can like, I'm going to engage this stuff and I'm going to shut the hell up and I'm just going to use whatever privilege I have to provide platforms for other people. So this is going to be my last public talk. I promise.
What? No.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay.
It's a kind of Duchampian
No. I'm
morale.
serious. I will never, ever do another public talk, and you can hold me to that, because I don't deserve. No, it's not. That's it. Okay. So how many minutes have we got?
But I hope this is not the fruit of this experience tonight.
No. It's just a lovely. It's something I've been grappling with for a while, and I committed to this talk before I made. So that's it.
No,
to all 55 people who are watching, it's like, ciao.
Now we've got 8 more minutes, but we're not stuck with precision here.
But Henry, maybe what about, because you've watched us converse twice, and I'd be really curious to know what your impressions are.
I think that's exactly what we wanted. This is why I'm quite happy with the talk you're having this time and also the last time, because the worst thing you can have is 2 people always agreeing. Yeah, I see it exactly the same way. Yeah, and you're coming from very different angles, with Grischka being a lawyer and an art historian, as you said earlier, and you being a photographer and an artist. So there were areas where you were entwining, where you had the same views and opinions, but there was a lot of things where I was quite happy that you shared very different views for different angles on the same phenomenon. And for example, I was struck by one thing when Grischka said he was gripped by the photographies he saw of all this violence. You said, oh no, that's not my experience. I don't see these pictures like this. So I was wondering, is that what you would like us also to see, images like this, or is it just your personal experience because you've been dealing with these topics so often? You've been watching the background of them, you've seen the context, you've researched and investigated the context, how they became what they are now. So how would you like us to look at these photos?
I think it's about, I've got a brother who's a doctor, and I remember driving with him on several occasions, and we witnessed an accident, and he would slam on the brakes, run out, and he'd go and do first aid and save someone's life. Whereas I'd sit there watching someone bleeding and, and be traumatized by that image of somebody literally, but it's not to say that he doesn't have the capacity to empathize when he sees an image of somebody dying, so I think we all need to have, I think to be overwhelmed by our emotional response is a bit like crying when you watch a kind of sitcom on an aeroplane, it's a bit like, I don't know if that's because of the lack of oxygen or whatever, it's a bit like, or even adverts, it's happened to me, it's like, don't be such a sucker, we need to have access to our diagnostic, like clinical, be a bit clinical, but at the same time, it's a bit like having a kind of IQ and an EQ, you know what I mean? And like the best people in life have a bit of both. And the worst people
have neither.
Or like, Elon Musk, it's like, you know what I mean? It's like, maybe Christopher Columbus here. Anyway, I mean, So I'd say it's a mixture. No, it's not about being purely clinical, I think, but being able to not be overwhelmed by a kind of trite emotional response, you know. But at the same time, yes, it's like, Grischka, I also go to the cinema. Well, I used to go to the cinema. We all used to go to the cinema, but, you know, and weep like a baby, and that's, well, I saw this quote today who said it. It was like, art is there to keep us from dying from the truth. And that really resonated with me, because it was like, you know, the truth is overwhelming. And honestly, if I had to be subsumed or sitting in a swimming pool of truth all the time, I wouldn't want to be on this planet.
Yeah.
You know, not even with Joe Biden. Certainly not.
Grischka.
Yeah, I mean, this is, in a way, you try to give us the best of two worlds here. Truth and poetry. And in some ways, I mean, the music that you played just before our session started was quite to the point. I mean, it was about Hello Darkness. It was a cover version. It was emotional with an intellectually spot-on lyrics. So there's when you I wouldn't want to label, to put labels on everything. Of course, this is a déformation professionnelle of the art historian, to put labels on everything. It's something I'd like to resist. But the combination of an educational appeal that, yes, this goes out to humanity. We have to be emotionally sane and intellectually sane and politically aware. It's a bit of Schiller and the education thought there, which is, it has, for a historian or an art historian, it has a consoling maybe finish to our conversation that started off so brutal, because these images because they are, as you said, we're sitting in a swimming pool of truth all the time, and it's creepy, and it creeps very close to us because we're embedded in all these images. And then again, you showed us how detached we are from these images. I mean, we have to look out for them. We can't surround us with very superficial photographs all the time and never become aware of all of that, what's going on. And it's part of that digital darkness that we're living in. So food for thought here, I think.
I mean, I would love to continue this conversation, but in private, Grischka. I think, as I say, I want to get out of the public. But
yeah.
Can I make a suggestion that we end by playing that song again? And is that okay?
Yeah, wonderful idea.
Long song, but right point.
Yeah,
absolutely.
More than meets the eye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much for Into the Black by the Chromatics. So there's everything which we have, black and white. We're going dark now here because that was the last session of the series of talks. And I think in a certain way, we come back to the beginning, because the first entry we had was on sound and vision, and it was about the relationship between pop and theory with Anton Corbijn. So that was the perfect choice for tonight. Thank you very much, Adam. Ich bedanke mich bei Ihnen allen, die Sie zugehört haben. Wir haben eine ganze Reihe von sehr schönen Rückmeldungen bekommen auf das Gespräch heute Abend und insbesondere auch auf die Musik am Schluss. Von daher, also auch das war der perfekte Abschluss. Ich bedanke mich ganz herzlich bei Adam Broomberg, Grischka Petri und Janne Wilhelmus. Sie haben gehört, Sie hatten das Privileg, ein letztes Mal Adam Broomberg in einer öffentlichen Veranstaltung sprechen zu hören. Nehmen Sie das in Ihr Herz und mit nach Hause. Und wir hoffen, dass wir Sie in der einen oder anderen Gelegenheit wiedersehen. Aber erst noch einmal ganz herzlichen Dank an Adam Broomberg und Grischka Petri. Alles Gute und bis bald dann mal wieder.
Gute Nacht und
Ciao.
bleiben Sie gesund.
Genau.
Thank you so much.
Dankeschön. Tschüss.
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 Tschüss.